Bienvenido a Café Espacial, con la conducción del Dr. Fermín Romero Vázquez. Análisis con líderes expertos e influencers del futuro de las agencias espaciales globales. Exploración espacial y potencial expansión de la raza humana en el universo. Opinión en los ámbitos más prometedores del sector espacial por parte de sus protagonistas en gobierno, industria y servicios. Academias y ONG. Beneficios de la ciencia y tecnología espacial para toda la sociedad. Desde tierra firme es momento de un café. Café Espacial.
Hello, my dear friends. Welcome again to this episode 10 of Café Espacial series. And we are very happy to have with us Dr. Mazlan Othman. My dear friend, thank you very much, really, for being with us, even though it is AM for you. So thank you very much.
It's a pleasure for me, Fermín. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, let me introduce Dr. Mazlan Othman. She's a professor emerita at anCI. She is a Malaysian astrophysicist whose work has pioneered Malaysia's participation in space exploration. She was her country's first astrophysicist and helped to create a curriculum in astrophysics at the National University, as well as to build public awareness and understanding of astronomy and space issues. In 1999, Kofi Annan, Secretary General of the United Nations, appointed Mazlan as Director of the United Nations Office for the Space Affairs, UNOOSA, in Vienna. However, the Prime Minister requested her to return to Malaysia in July 2002 to serve for 5 years as the Director General of anCI, the Malaysian National Space Agency, where her work to lead the launch for the first Malaysian astronaut, Sheikh Mustafa Shukor. Mazlan was reappointed as UNOOSA director in 2007 by the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and left, of course, anCI to return to the post. After retiring from the United Nations, Othman served as on advisory committee and on boards involving science and space as visiting professor and became senior fellow of the Academy of Science of Malaysia. In September 2016, she was named director of the International Science Council Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific. To give a brief introduction of the subject, which is space exploration in today's global scenario, let me say that the space exploration remains a significant endeavor in today's global scenario, driven by a variety of scientific, economic, and political factors. Some key points about the space exploration in the new space era are the scientific research, the economic, security, and geopolitical interests, international cooperation, national pride and prestige, planetary protection, among others. Space exploration remained an important and dynamic field with a wide range of scientific, economic, and geopolitical implication. Welcome, my dear Mazlan.
Thank you, Fermín. Hello.
Well, to start the conversation, please, and after addressing the United Nations Specialized Agency on Outer Space Affairs, and for the benefit of our audience, please explain us briefly what is UNOOSA and what are the main objectives and their programs.
UNOOSA, the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, is not very well known. Even in the UN, it's not well known. And when I first took up my position at this office, everybody in Malaysia was very surprised that there is an office. Of the office actually was started when the United Nations assumed that there was going to be an arms race in space because of the competition between the United States and Russia at that time. And so the United Nations picked up the topic of the peaceful uses of outer space. And at that point, a secretariat was formed, and that was the first formation of the office. And so, so why is the office so important even within the UN context? Is because if you look at the Outer Space Treaty, it clearly states that the outer space is the common province of all humankind, which means that no state has sovereignty over space. And so any decisions about space, any policy, any law will have to be decided at the multilateral level in the United Nations. Fermín, people say the United Nations is irrelevant, we don't need it. But if you talk about space, if there was no United Nations, we would have to invent the United Nations in order to create a platform where you can discuss space issues. And especially the idea of having the discussion in the United Nations is so that developing countries in particular would have a say in what happens in outer space. Because as you know, space started out as purely for defense or military purposes, and it was an elite group of countries that could access space. And the idea is that other countries, particularly developing countries, can have a say in what happens in outer space. So, so since then, a lot of the treaties, a lot of the body of legal regime in the world right now are all decided at the United Nations.
Okay, well, very interesting your answer, because for most of the people, they believe that that UNOOSA it's very well known, but you're really right. I agree on that. Well, professionally, tell me, what did this important experience means to you?
Well, professionally, that's very interesting, because I started my profession my career at the university. So I started out as a researcher, as a physicist, an astrophysicist in the university. And then I was seconded to the Prime Minister's department to start the Space Science Division under the Prime Minister's office. And that was the reason that was done is because any new organizations is usually placed under the Prime Minister's office, so that will expedite a lot of decisions on budgets, on policy. And I enjoyed that because I never had a problem with budget being in the Prime Minister's department. So from university, I went to government, and when I was in the government, that was when I was called to serve the United Nations. So that meant a multilateral intergovernmental organization. So there was quite a big step in terms of career. And I like that very much, because professionally it meant that I was dealing with international issues. So as long as I was working for the government, my focus was always on, of course, Malaysia. And of course, we always had partnerships, but always in the context of Malaysia. But being in the UN meant that I had to think globally. And of course, this was something very new to me as an academic at the university. So if I look back professionally, Fermín, what was the most, then after that, as you know, I went to join an NGO, an international NGO, the International Science Council. If I look back in that career, what would have been most interesting, it would be the United Nations. I enjoyed my stint at the United Nations best.
I think so. Well,
yes.
What is the role of UNOOSA for the development of space exploration? Tell us, please.
Okay, so if people listening to this podcast or webcast can Google the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, and they'll see the organizational structure. So you see that we are dealing with space policy and law. We are also dealing with space applications, and there is a section also on disaster reduction. And the program is called UN Spider. Again, I don't think I need to explain all of this because everybody has Google. They can go to Google. And but I think what is less known is the fact that we also look at the global navigation satellite systems. We have a special not a special section, a special program on the International Committee on GNSS, a very important work because so many countries are now setting up their own global navigation satellite systems, Fermín, as you know. But we need to bring them to the table so that they will agree on some commonalities, so that people like you and me will benefit from having a seamless access to global navigation satellite system. And I think that is one of the things that I really enjoyed. One of the things I set up. So maybe we can talk about that later. So the office actually acts as the secretariat, or rather we set up the parliamentary service for the meetings. So there's the Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. There's the main committee, which meets in June, the legal subcommittee, which meets in February, and the scientific and technical committee that meets in just before Corpus. And we provide the secretariat for those meetings. That is the important role of the office in terms of its being a secretariat to expedite discussions and debate amongst all the countries on space issues.
Yeah, I personally, I really enjoy the work at both subcommittees and also in the plenary and John normally, so which is a great job in the multilateral level. Yes, thank you for remembering.
So but you remember, we also had lots of forums, we had exhibitions during those meetings. Yeah, it wasn't just a meeting like the United Nations meeting. Countries were really hands-on.
Exactly. Yes. Were great moments in Vienna, in the beautiful Vienna. Yes. Okay. Well, tell us, how does UNOOSA articulate the work between government and space agencies and academia and research towards the development of space exploration for the benefits of society?
So through those committees, through the committee, United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, as I mentioned, and also the legal subcommittee and the scientific technical subcommittee, we actually can form working groups. We can form, we can, all three bodies can decide on a lot of topics that will cover government's issues, that will also cover private sector issues. You know, Fermín, in the time that I was in the UN from 1999 to 2007, I saw that there was a gradual acceptance of the space community of the important role played by the private sector. I think this is this is not a trivial matter, because most countries, most governments actually, when they debate in the United Nations, they don't want to involve the private sector. But because the private sector was taking a bigger and bigger active part in space, they had to be brought to the table. And you cannot decide on a lot of things in space without involving the private sector. As well as, of course, we always involve the civil society, you know, the NGOs, the scientists, the academia, the universities, they are always there. But in the time that I was there was a very strong focus towards the private sector. The other thing I noticed when I was there in terms of intergovernmental interactions was that in the beginning, the countries only wanted to talk about peaceful users. And there was a lot of worry that if we talk about military or defense, that subject will overwhelm the discussions, that people will then find, defense or military a lot more exciting than peaceful users, you know. But it was gradually realized that we cannot talk about peaceful users without talking about how do we maintain things being peaceful, is to talk about prevention of militarization. And so the topic of prevention of militarization became an important subject. So that is how, through the work of the office and how it access, how it allows discussions in the United Nations, we were able to bring to the table the issues, the important issues of the private sector, as well as militarization. And you remember that we also bring to the table subject matter like climate change, you know, because that one I don't even need to mention, because the role of space in understanding the climate is so essential now. You cannot, if we lose any of our satellites, we will lose information on climate change on our Earth itself. And so that is how important the discussions at the United Nations is.
Of course, particularly at this time when the peaceful use of the space is very important regarding, for example, the Ukraine invasion.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Because you know that space is now the other theater of war. So without if the countries who are fighting a war cannot access their space assets, it's very likely that they will not win the battle, because we need global navigation, we need global positioning, we need timing, we need targeting, which means we need remote sensing. No, there is not a day of our everyday life or in the military that you do not depend on space. So every aspect of our life, we depend on space.
Of course. Well, changing the subject, in gender issues in space, what was your particular point of view? What is your particular point of view?
Okay, so again, you know, because I was in the United Nations for over a period of about 10 years, but I was there, I was very interested from 1999 until about 2014. So in that time, I realized that in the beginning, there were very few women in the room. In 1999, I could almost count the number of women, Fermín. But by the time I left, I think at any one time, there was about 30% women in the room. Either they came as experts to support their delegations, or they were diplomats. And there were some really wonderful female diplomats from all over the world who made quite an impact at COPUS. So, but since I left, there have been several initiatives like Space for Women and whatnot, but I will not talk about that because I did not initiate those. But I'm sure you can look it up in the website of UNOOSA. But that would be my observation for me. More and more women are involved in space today.
Yeah, I'm sure you do the necessary work to help the following administrations. I'm sure of that.
Yes,
well,
yes.
This is a very important question. If you could improve UNOOSA role, what changes would you propose to strengthen its role and performance in the specialized agency for the space affairs?
What I tried very hard when I was there to make UNOOSA more, to mainstream UNOOSA into all the discussions at the United Nations. I told you that most people do not know that the office exists. In fact, one of my battles was to make sure the United Nations Secretariat itself knew we existed. You see, because when we talk about climate change, when we talk about the UN environmental program or development program, they could very well benefit from the data of space, space data, but they didn't realize that, so every time I had to inform them of the existence of our office. And I think we managed to change that in the end, that we are now, this is very hard to explain, but if you look at the big United Nations organizational chart, we did not appear in that chart for a very long time, but now we do appear in that chart. And so what change I would like to see, that would be the change I would like to see in the UN.
Thank you very much. Well, let's go to a short pause and then we will continue talking on these important issues.
Okay.
Como cosa del destino tuve en mi mente claridad. Puedo trazar un nuevo camino, contando día a día una verdad. El progreso no depende de otros, las ideas te dan libertad. Unidos somos más fuertes que cualquier fuerte tempestad. Trabajamos sin cansancio por ver al hermano sonreír, sabiendo que yo soy el cambio, sí doy más por mi país. Voy a soñar, voy a luchar, y el sonreír siempre daré 1000 veces más por mi país.
Well, my friends, we're again with our very special invited guest. So, my dear Mazlan, as director of UNOOSA, what do you consider was your legacy or the personal imprint you left on UNOOSA, and what satisfactions did you get from it?
In terms of a legacy, I think what I left behind was a new organizational structure. So I left an office that was very clearly demarcated space. We didn't have a section on policy before, that we set up the section on policy and space law. Space applications was always there. And as I said, we set up a small program on the International Committee on GNSS. So we do have what we call the Executive Secretariat of the ICG. And when I was there, we also set up UN SPIDER, which is a small group that focuses on disaster risk reduction. We have 3 offices there in Bonn, in China, as well as Vienna, you know. But I think what I am most happy about, because that's organizational structure, what I was most happy about is having set up 2 important programs. One was the Basic Space Technology Initiative, and the other was the Human Space Technology Initiative, BSTI and HSTI. Let me talk about BSTI first. BSTI was set up because a lot of the developing countries, when I took up office again in 2007, had mentioned that what would be very useful for developing countries is to have an understanding of space technology. And before that, the office was always focused on space applications, nothing on space technology, whereas technology was what they required if they wanted to get access to space. And because of that, we set up BSTI with the support of the Austrian government. So for 3 years, the Austrian government gave us funding to bring people from all over the world. We had lecturers from all over the world talking about small satellites, especially, and how to build these small satellites. We also had support from governments where universities gave scholarships for students from the developing countries to pursue engineering programs in Japan, for instance. So that was part of our space technology initiative. We also managed to get some launches for them to launch their small satellites. So I was really pleased with that, because when I was the head of the space agency, that was the thing I missed most, you know, the understanding of space technology. Because as you know, space technology is very lots of proprietorship and secrecy in technology. So, but the basic space technology overcame all of that. The next thing was the Human Space Technology Initiative. And I think you might remember that I recruited Takao Doi, who is an astronaut from Japan, especially to lead this program. And the idea was that so that developing countries have more access to being in space or taking part in especially the International Space Station. And so with that, especially Takao Doi was very successful in getting the developing countries to have programs that they could, experiments that they could carry out at the International Space Station. This was a big deal, you know, never happened before. And we managed to do that through this initiative. And a lot of interest was created by through this program. China, for instance, even mentioned that if they had an International Space Station, which I think they will by 2024, they will devote some of their equipment to the UNOOSA space human space technology program. So I hope that will happen. They promise that. It's not yet happened, but I'm hoping that that would happen. So those were the two things I think in terms of a legacy I left behind. Of course, not that those they will continue forever, but I think I assisted a lot of the developing countries to do that. There's the space technology as well as the human space technology program.
Even we are in different regions, we think very similar, and I think personally it is a great legacy. Thank you, Martin. And changing the subject, in the era of the new space, what are the current challenges and future perspectives for UNOOSA?
Yes, new space is both a big opportunity for everybody, but it could also be a big worry, simply because big opportunity. Let me talk about the opportunity first. I think new space means that we are now able to use commercially available components. There is a lot more investment in space, and so the barrier to doing business in space is now lower. So you can see there are lots of startups all over the world, in India, in Europe, in Japan, in China, even in Malaysia. We have many startups, young people who set up companies to do business in space. And to me, that is the best outcome or this of what they call now new space. But new space also means that the commercial sector is now predominant in the space sector. And when I took part in a forum in the Dubai Expo, and the first question that was asked to me, because I was invited to be one of the speakers, the first question that was asked to me was, look at all the billionaire boys who are now controlling space. Why should the world let the billionaires lead the way to outer space? They were talking about Richard Branson, talking about Jeff Bezos, or especially Elon Musk, right? So these are the leaders, these are the heroes of new space. Is no longer the head of NASA, or astronauts even, that people admire today. When you talk about space, they talk about Elon Musk, they don't talk about astronauts anymore. Yeah, so this is the new space. But I told them that you can't stop the billionaire boys from going to space any more than you can stop them from buying a new yacht or getting a new wife. No, you can't stop them. They have their own hobbies. But I said the good news is that space is the common province of all humankind. And what this means is that any decisions about space, the way we're going to behave, the way we're going to manage space, will be decided at the United Nations. And because this was in Dubai, in UAE, and I said, and countries like UAE have a role in determining, what happens in space, or even a country like Malaysia, even though we do not invest a lot of money in space, but in the UN we can still influence what happens. So yes, as I said, new space, lots of opportunities. I love it. All the young people coming up with new ideas. They're going to exploit asteroids, blah, blah, blah. But there are also cautionary things that you and I, Fermín, we should, not start, but make sure happens. For instance, the issues of ethics. What happens in space? And then this whole idea of going to have habitats. We're going to have settlements, habitats in space. I don't want to use the word colony because it's a bad word. But, habitats and settlements. Who are going to run those settlements? Who gets to go to those settlements? These are issues of ethics. And we have not started discussing that. not the world. And the developing countries are, going about blissfully, not knowing that soon we will go to Mars, and they think it doesn't matter. It matters. And a lot of the speeches I give, I say, developing countries must pay attention to space exploration. If they're going to mine asteroids, wow, we must pay attention, because it's going to bring down the price of minerals, for instance. So it will have a big economic impact on Africa, for instance, which is the biggest exporter of minerals. Well, there's Australia too. But we must pay attention to space. And I love talking about what developing countries can do, and we cannot give up. We have to play a role.
Well, thinking in this answer and reviewing, of course, the success stories of countries like India, China, South Korea, among others, do you think that the gap between space powers and developing countries could be reduced in the not too distant future?
Oh, you can already see it happening. This gap is already closing. Of course, nobody can beat the amount of money the Americans spend in space. I think that is 10 times what everybody else together invests in space. That's fine. I think we like, there is room for leadership in science, in technology. But I think India and China have shown that they too can take leadership roles. Now, we all don't need to do the same things. So this is a competition versus collaboration, cooperation. We need both. We need competition because we need to do the best. And you do the best technology, the best science if you are competing. But you also need to cooperate so that we don't do the same things. We don't overlap. And we pool our resources so that those resources go a lot further than if we were doing it alone. So I think you will agree with me that in terms of going to Mars, having a big impact on Mars, no one country can do it by themselves. It has to be done with a group of countries, and which is why you have Artemis, the Americans and their partners together talking about that gateway to the moon. And of course, the Russians and China are also cooperating. And China, for instance, has sent out an invitation to all countries to join them to do something with their lunar space station idea. But then I always tell my audience, name me any country in Africa, for instance, and I can tell you whether they are involved in space or not.
Yes, of
Then
course.
they say to me something like Gabon. I say, yes, Gabon is involved in space. They say, how? Because Gabon uses space data, space imagery. And you think there's Chile, I said, Morocco, Kenya, they all have satellite programs.
Yes.
And this, of course, they're not huge satellites, they're small satellites, but they have satellite programs, which means their young people are working towards using space technology or trying to achieve having a satellite in space. It's just unheard of, like 20 years ago, for school children to think about having their own, building a satellite and launching it in space. But this is not so difficult today. And I think so most developing countries can use that same concept, that same approach to access space. And more countries now are able to build satellites because they can build satellites in schools. Of course, in terms of launching to orbit, there's still very limited numbers, but there is more and more countries that can do it today. And as you know, private sector can do it. So if private sector can do it, the prices will go down. And when the prices go down, then more and more you get better access and more competition,
Exactly.
And so
yes.
I'm very optimistic for the future.
Me too, which is also really exciting. Yeah. Well, in the current scenario, space development blocks are integrating, for example, North America and Europe, the facilitating an alliance between China and Russia, the countries of Asia Pacific, Africa, you have mentioned, and of course, Latin America. What do you think about this regional alliance, and what is the future that you see for them?
Yeah. A group of us have always been working towards regional alliances. It makes sense. As I said to you, we need to collaborate, right? And if we are in the same region, we'll have the same mission, we have the same objectives, we have the same problems, we have the same challenges. And so it makes sense, of course, like the European Space Agency. Then there is now an initiative in Africa to have an African space agency. You can tell more about the Latin space,
ALCE, it's the name of Latin American agency, ALCE.
Oh, yes. But let me talk about the Asian region. You see, this is all about politics, Fermín. You see, in the Asian region, we have a huge disparity between countries. Yeah, you've got Timor-Leste, which is a very new country, or Papua New Guinea, which is so poor. They're all the least developed countries, like Africa, I guess, in Asia. And on the other hand, we also have Japan. We have South Korea, China, and India. And unfortunately, the big players, I mentioned them already, South Korea, China, Japan, and India, they are not united politically. This is a fact. I mean, I'm sure I'm not saying anything that people don't already know. And because of this, for the Asian region, for the Asia Pacific region, it's going to be very difficult to form one space agency. This is my prediction, that maybe, I don't know, maybe another 40, 50 years, people might decide, okay, let's have an Asian space agency.
What about APSCO as conference?
Yeah, you see APSCO, that's the Asia Pacific Space Cooperation Organization. And do you know how many countries there are there? I mean, only China is leading it. Japan is not in there. India is not in there. South Korea is not in there. Australia is not in there, because they cannot agree to, I believe, it's the background of this, the backdrop of this problem is politics. And therefore, we cannot get them all together. But, Fermín, I think what I'm more optimistic about is our region here, where I am, which is ASEAN, Southeast Asian nations. Now here, we have disparity. Of course, Singapore is a developed country, very rich. And on the other hand, we have Myanmar, which is, again, a least developed country. But culturally, we are not so different. And then I think, and because in terms of size too, we're not that different. So I am optimistic that the Southeast Asian countries, maybe not all of ASEAN will come together to form this. Either we're going to collaborate in getting spaceport or satellites in the future. So I'm optimistic about an ASEAN regional grouping in space, but not so optimistic about a big Asia, which includes, Japan, China, and India. I'm not too optimistic about that.
I understand. Interests are very important in these cases. Okay, in the current situation of confrontation between the spacefaring nations, I mean, US, Russia, and China, what is your advice this situation?
That is so tragic, it's so tragic because, of course, there are the politics. You and I cannot solve those political problems, right, Fermín? But if you're looking at it purely from a scientist's point of view, it is tragic that we are in confrontation. We can compete, I think. There's nothing wrong with competition, but confrontation is very counterproductive, of course. And I remember when I was still in USA, and there was a lot of concern, especially when we have our HSTI, which is the Human Space Technology Initiative. People were saying that, in a few years, the ISS will be deorbited, and then we won't have a space station, and there's no appetite to build something like that, because, it costs too much money. And then I looked at them and I said, everyone seems to forget that soon we will have another space station, which is the Chinese space station. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. So why are we saying that there won't be any more space stations up there for humankind? There will be, except that we have to work with, this time, China. And if people would overcome some of the political differences, yes, by 2024, I think in a couple of years, we will have a fully functioning, orbiting space station run by China. And this is why I'm, to me, to have everybody come on board is to cooperate, whether we're going to Mars or whether we're going to have an orbiting station, would benefit all of humankind.
Yes, it is
confrontation, not confrontation.
Yes, of
but
course.
We are idealistic.
Well, this is the current world, so we have to not only understand, not only analyze. We should act to press these spacefaring nations to think in the peace, because it is really it's very worried to see this situation. But anyway.
Fermín, just before we leave the subject, it could be space could be the one thing that should bring all of the humans together, all of our resources, in order for us, people say that if the dinosaurs had a space program, they wouldn't be extinct, right? Because they would be able to spot that asteroid and they would know what to do with it. And so that is the sort of thing, I think, space might be that one thing that unites all of humankind. Of course, in this case, there is a disaster going to be happening, and then we all have to be together to avoid that disaster. Of course, we want to avoid that disaster, but who knows, that might be the thing that brings us together as human beings. And that's so important. Not nanotech, not robots. Everybody's in competition there. And so I'm optimistic. In space, I think we might have a chance at bringing people together. Again, I'm idealistic and probably naive, everybody says, but I have this dream that it's the space that brings humanity together.
I also agree, but definitely as humanity, we have to evolve. I always said that it is important to, when we think in colonizing other celestial bodies or planets.
Settling, don't use colonize, settling other countries, exactly. Other planets.
Exactly. Of course. But we have to evolve into a humanity 2.0, because we can't go to another different celestial bodies with all these issues and things like that, because they are very.
So, Fermín, we need to get together to see how we can approach this, talking about the ethics and morality of going to space, of settling, of making habitats in space.
I agree. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, my friend, we are very close to the end of this talk, but
Yeah,
let me
sure.
no, we'll have some minutes, but let me ask you, what are your current professional projects and how did your
Ooh.
time boost your career? Tell us, please.
I'm sometimes I'm thinking I should be at the end of my career, so to speak.
No,
But
I
of
don't think
course,
so.
it just
You have
but yeah,
time, no?
yeah. But it just means that I don't have you're not employed, not fully employed, you know.
Yeah.
But I still have many projects. As I said, I'm still helping lots of young people, especially in my country. When they are startups, they always come to me for advice. But in terms of what gives me the biggest pleasure these days is I have this program of merging the arts and the sciences. But maybe you can see an example here. This is a batik painting of of the exploding star. So what I've always been doing is to get the artists and the scientists to come together and integrate their fields, because I say that the way of the future is an integration of all knowledge. Because right now, the scientists don't want to talk to the artists, you know. I'm trying to bring them together so that they will exchange information and be inspired, mutually inspired by each other. So that is my biggest pleasure right now, to bring artists and scientists together to be mutually inspired, to come up with artistic products or even scientific products that are innovative, but at the same time prove to the world, at least to my country, that we cannot think, we have to think holistically now. We cannot just say that, right brain, left brain, or people are streaming children at school, which I feel is very unfortunate. Streaming art stream, science stream. I hated that when I was in school because I wanted to do literature and art, but they streamed me to science. I had no choice. But because of that, you know, I have this mission in life that I want to bring people together. But that's my hobby right now, and I don't get paid for it.
Great hobby. I was remembering when occasionally we went from the UNOOSA venue to a gala, I don't know, reception from an
Yes.
embassy, and we were talking from different issues. I think it's time to revive that issues. For example, to collaborate,
Yes. Yeah.
Mexico, and start
Yes.
these projects. Personally thinking in the new generations, because they need all this experience you had, and how share this information with these people, young people. How did you?
Yeah,
What
I
did you
love
think?
working with young people. I love working with young people because they are the future, you know. And anything that I have started, of course, I also left a legacy here in the country, starting the space program. It was always for the young people, you know, for the people who came after me. And now everybody in Malaysia can think of a career in space. Before, I mean, it was, you know, just something, it was impossible. But yeah, I think that what I do was to set the groundwork for everybody. And now I can sort of relax and talk about art and music like that.
Well, my friend, I think for me it was a real pleasure to talk with you.
It was a big pleasure to be with you, Fermín. I'm sorry I wasn't so formal. Because a lot of the things people can Google these days, Fermín. So
I hope you enjoyed this, really.
Yeah. So this is just my personal views and my personal dreams and ideals of what I hope can happen.
Yeah.
Could be wrong, I could be naive, but well, there you go.
Yes. Well, give us a final reflection to the audience and just to say goodbye and to desire you a good
Yes.
weekend.
Yeah, okay. So I think your audience are mainly halfway around the planet from me, right? If you poke a hole between in Malaysia now, you'll reach you. That's halfway around the planet because we are 14 hours 14 hours
Yes,
difference.
time difference. Yeah.
Yes, and we had the satellite hops, for you to
Yes.
communicate with me. But that is what space allows us to do. You see, allows the world to be smaller. So whenever people say the Earth has become smaller, humanity is becoming one, through what you think? Through space, actually, through the developments in space. And soon we'll be one planet because we'll have to go out of our planet and go to other planets. Anyways, I hope, I'm not sure it will happen in my lifetime, but I told my children that you will be communicating with somebody on Mars. In their lifetime. So it's not in Mama's lifetime, but definitely in their lifetime, you'll be communicating with your friends on Mars. And I don't know what they'll have there, maybe not TikTok, but something on Mars. So that to me is terribly exciting, very, very exciting.
Yes, excellent. Well, thank you very much, my friend. Let's keep in touch. Let's do things together. And
yes, you should.
Have a nice weekend.
Thank you for having me, Fermín. And thank you to this audience. I love to, to hear. I mean, later on, you give me a link, right? And then I think people might comment and all that. I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you so much, my friend. Great. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.